Maybe you're watching this before midterms, maybe you're watching it before finals, but chances are you've got a paper presentation coming up. Today, I'm going to talk you through a paper and presentation workshop to help you ace those writing and speaking assignments that you have coming up. My goal is to help you organize your papers and presentations, and that organization falls into three buckets. We have our introduction, our body section, and our conclusion. Let's get started with the introduction. Effective introductions have three parts: a hook, a thesis statement, and a preview of main points. The hook should always come first. You want to capture the audience's attention right off the bat. You can do that in a variety of different ways. For example, you could tell a story or refer to a recent current event, share a fact or statistic. You could show a surprising photograph. You could tell a quote. You want to consider when you're picking what you use as your hook, your audience. Who are you speaking with and what might be able to draw them in? You also might want to think about what tone are you trying to establish with this presentation. If you're trying to entertain while informing, you might want to consider something maybe funny. If you have a serious, persuasive presentation, picking a serious attention grabber makes a lot of sense. There is a common one that a lot of students use, and that is envisioning a hypothetical situation. So, what if one day you started a new job at a new organization with no friends? Those kind of what if scenarios can be useful, but I would caution you to use them as kind of a last resort and think about how you can use more strategic approaches to hooking your audience's attention. The thesis statement is the most important part of the introduction, and the thesis statement refines the purpose of the paper or presentation. It captures everything that the audience will be learning about into one central idea and foreshadows what the main points of the paper or presentation will be. There are a lot of requirements of a thesis statement that are listed below, but the most important are that it's expressed as a full declarative statement, one sentence that is structured concisely and previews the key issues that will be discussed in the paper or presentation. Again, limit that thesis statement to one idea and try to use very specific language as you do so. And finally, the very last part of your introduction is the preview of main points, which provides a framework for the rest of the paper or presentation and lets the audience know what they can expect. This helps the audience follow along and kind of get their wits about them on what you're going to be talking to them or writing to them about. And we want this to be very explicit. And I don't mean swear words explicit. I mean direct and clear about what we will accomplish. I will explain X, Y, and Z. Or first, I'll describe the problem. Second, I offer a solution. And third, I justify the budget. When we are very obvious for the audience, it cues them up right from the beginning to know that the rest of our presentation will be very well structured too. There are a few other things to consider including in your introduction depending on the type of presentation that you're giving and how much time that you have. So first is a relevance statement, and this shows the relationship between the topic and the audience. It basically tells the audience why they should care about what you're presenting about or writing about, and kind of indicates their what's in it for me or the so what of the presentation or paper. You also might need to define some key terms. So think about, am I using jargon that my audience might not understand? If so, define that key term for them. Or if you're using a word in a particular way that might be
different than how the audience might understand it, define that key word for them, especially if they might have a different connotation than you do. Finally, you can consider including a credibility statement. This lets the audience know why they should listen to you about this topic. It demonstrates your trustworthiness and believability. It can highlight your experiences or your education, and it can help answer the question, what's your relationship to this topic even, and why should we listen to you? When you include a hook, a thesis statement, and a preview of main points, and especially when you include a relevance statement, define your key terms, and use a credibility statement, your audience knows that they're in good hands throughout the rest of your paper or presentation.
After we've provided a strong introduction for our paper or presentation, then we move to the body section, which is what provides the substance of our paper or presentation. And with our body sections, it's really important that we have structure and organization across three different levels, those being the body, the paragraph or the main point, and the sentence. The body of our paper and paragraphs, or our presentation and main points, should be well structured. So with regard to the paper or paragraph, we should have our introduction first, a given set of main points or paragraphs, and then our conclusion. In the same way, our paragraphs or our main points should have a topic sentence, and then supporting sentences or supporting points, which are often explanations and definitions or elaborations and examples. And then we have our concluding sentence that wraps up and transitions to our next point. When we're structuring the body of our presentation or paper, we want to think very critically about how we're presenting our main points or our paragraphs, what order we're presenting them in, and what the focus of them are in order to make sure that the audience can follow along with our organizational structure. So I'll give you time to pause the video here and review some options that you have for informational organizational patterns. Now there are some patterns that can be used for informational and persuasive presentations, but on the bottom of the screen you'll see there are some that are pretty much just for persuasion. Take a pause here and review some of your options for informational and persuasive strategies. Transitions are really important for helping the audience follow along. We can use previews, verbal transitions, nonverbal transitions, and summaries. One that's not listed here, though, is a directional transition. And a directional transition takes your audience from one point to the other. I like to think of it as crossing a bridge from one patch of grass to the next. So you say something like,
now that we talked about point A, let's move forward to talk about point B. So the directional component is when we say, now that we're done with this thing, we're moving in another direction. Signposts are like signposts when you're on a hiking trail. They're little cues to help the audience know that they're going in the right direction or to let them know what direction they're going in. On the slide here, we have a bunch of different signposts listed. Take a pause and check out some of them.
Each paragraph should demonstrate that you really thought about the content that is most important to be presented and how you're presenting it to the audience. We have our topic sentence or our main point and our concluding sentence or our kind of wrap-up point. And in the middle, you have three either supporting sentences or main points. An example of how you could structure a paragraph would be to make a claim. After you've made that claim, define one of the key terms in that claim that your audience might not be familiar with. Then you can show your evidence as for why the claim is true. Maybe cite an outside source or tell a personal story and explain how that claim impacted a group or impacted the world or impacted you. And then finally reiterate your claim and transition or summarize as you move to the next point. Here's an example of how that last paragraph might look. You want to be firm in your topic sentence or your main point. Dr. Benedict was a Democratic leader. Then define what exactly is a Democratic leader. Democratic leadership is blank. It's really useful to use our own words when we're describing things like that rather than just citing word for word another person who said it, because saying it in our own words builds our credibility, especially if we paraphrase what someone else said, cite them, but use our own words. Then, if you're to believe that Dr. Benedict was a Democratic leader, you would want to see some evidence of that. She did this thing and that thing that demonstrated she was a Democratic leader. Finally, okay, she's a Democratic leader, so why does that matter? Having a Democratic leader allowed blank or permitted the class to do this. Finally, Dr. Benedict engaged in democratic leadership. That is summarizing the paragraph or the main point that you just heard, but not everyone wanted to participate. That is transitioning us to the next main point, which might be about some of the problems that democracy had.
Now that we've talked about structuring the body section of our papers and presentations and structuring our paragraphs and main points, let's move on to talking about the conclusion. The conclusion is what provides closure. When you're wrapping up a paper or presentation, consider concluding with these tasks. The first thing is to transition to the close. This is especially important when you're giving presentations.
So we can catch the audience's ear and let them know, hey, we're wrapping up. We can say things like, in conclusion, or to summarize, or in wrapping things up. Then, very, very importantly, we want to restate our thesis statement. What was the purpose of our presentation? What was the central idea or arguments that we made? We also want to review our main points. The more times the audience hears our main points or reads our main points, the more likely those main points are to stay with them after the presentation or the paper as the residual message. So you can switch the order of your thesis statement and main points, whatever flows best with your topic, but having those two things will make for a very strong conclusion. If you want to add the icing on the cake for your conclusion, consider offering a memorable close or a clincher. This is when you're leaving the audience with something to think about. We could refer back to the hook. So if you told a story at the beginning of your presentation or paper, you could finish up the story at the very end and tell the audience about the short-term or long-term resolution. You could also offer a call to action and encourage the audience to do something or emphasize the importance of what you talked about today. Maybe you refer back to your statement at the beginning of the presentation that told the audience why they should pay attention to you in the first place. So having that kind of memorable close or clincher, it provides closure, and I like to say it ties your presentation or your paper off with a bow and sends your audience off on a positive note. There are a couple of pitfalls for conclusions, and the biggest one is introducing new arguments or points. So we don't want to all of a sudden bring up a topic that the audience hasn't heard anything about throughout our presentation. That's going to throw them off and make them think that there's more coming, or you're going to not have a complete argument or thought at the very end. We also want to be very, very careful about the length of our conclusion. We don't want to just quickly wrap it up and stop, but we don't want to also draw it out forever and ever and ever. We want to try to find that sweet spot. Throughout your paper or presentation, you might have been citing sources if you were drawing on outside material. You don't want to wait till the very end of your paper or presentation to say, and here are the sources that I cited. That's not the best. Right after you talk about a source, make sure you provide a good oral or written citation, and then at the very end of your presentation or paper, you can offer a references list if someone wants to consult your sources further. But that's a topic for another time, a different lecture. I'm sure you're all exhausted by now, learning about how to structure a 5-paragraph essay or a 5-point presentation. I just want to summarize. Today we talked about structuring those papers and presentations. We talked about introductions, where you hook the audience's attention, you provide a thesis statement, and you preview your main points. You also might consider giving a relevant statement or a credibility statement or defining key terms in your introduction too. Then you've got your body section. You have your paragraphs or main points following a clear organizational structure. Within your paragraphs and key points, you have a topic sentence or a topic statement and your supporting evidence and a sentence that kind of summarizes and transitions to the next point. And finally, then you have your conclusion where you signal to the audience that you're wrapping up. Then you have your review of main points and your restatement of your thesis and a clincher or a memorable close that ties a pretty little bow on the top of your presentation or paper. If you still need more information, you can consult the Purdue OWL, and I'm not saying that just because I went there. It's a really good resource for writing and speaking. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.